Good evening once again. Am I audible enough? Thank you so much. So, being a journalist, I have been interviewing many people and doing some debate shows as well. Obviously, not as powerful as Arnab Goswami, but I have had some powerful discussions. But my nephew is the one who actually, debates with me a lot. And in fact, to begin with, the other day when we were watching Bahubali, India's top most spectacular movie, I'm sure everyone has watched this movie, right? Bahubali, has everyone watched it? Great. So the Bahubali movie, there is one scene where the Bahubali, before he becomes a king, he's supposed to go to Deshatan, right? He's supposed to go to Deshatan, and when he's going on a Deshatan, what happens is Deshatan is as actually he's roaming around the hinterland and the city and the kingdom. And what happens is the people do not know the king. They don't know who Bahubali is, whether he's a king or not. And my nephew laughed at me and he says, "Look, Mama, how idiotic this picture is. The people or the countrymen do not know their king at all." So, keeping the same thing in mind, Ajay, the first question I would like to shoot at you. As a CEO, as a leader, how many times do you do a Deshatan? Do you go to your branches? Do you go to your kingdom? Do you meet your customers? Do you meet your people?
That's an easy question, right? No, but I think first, the one thing that you should remember is all of us sitting here who are CEOs, we should never forget that we have got this job not because of something extraordinary about us. But the first important thing why you get a CEO's job is because you have been at the right place at the right time. And you should never take that away as humility about yourself, that lot many other people could have done your job, but you have got this job because you were there at the right place at the right time. Second, I think, leading by example is very important. So if you really want to lead an organization where customer comes first, it's very important that you spend more and more time in the front line, in the branches, where your customers are, where your people who are serving the customers, who I think are equally important are. So just for your information, Amol, and for the audience, we have a unit in the bank, which is called Frontline Service. We believe we have a service department and a call center for the customers, but we equally have one for our staff. Because clearly unhappy staff will lead to an unhappy customer, right? Unlikely an unhappy staff will lead to a happy customer. So our staff is as important as our customers. And we manage both with the same amount of intensity. Right. So with that, I think.
Quite interesting. Kannan sir, I would like to ask you, you have spent all your life in banking sector. You are the MD of SBI, now you are heading IBA. Tell me what are the major qualities that the leader should have in BFSI sector, which can actually not only help him to become a strong leader, but also grow the bank or the financial institution to a next level?
In one way, I agree with what Ajay said. A lot of things happens because you just happen to be at the right place. Right. Had I just missed something by about 1 month, right, I would have probably been somewhere in Raigad of Madhya Pradesh and still being a retired person there. Just so happens that you are at the right place at the right time. And one more thing which we have to see also, you have the right bosses. It's not a question of only right place and right. You have the right bosses who can give you an opportunity, which is there. And the only thing is, I would say a leader has to is, if you get an opportunity, grab it. And you have to make the best use of it. And another thing which I felt as a leader is, always trust someone. Okay. If you don't trust anyone, even people, in fact, I had a very nice interaction last week with someone. He said, trust is something when you don't know anything about the other person and still you believe in him. Right. If he's very transparent, then that's not trust. So you have to trust your juniors and then give them all the liberties, guide them as appropriate. And that will be a main hallmark of a leader, that you listen to him and give them full freedom. If the freedom is given to your people, actually I relax now. As the CEO of IBA, I actually do nothing. Actually, I trust everything to my juniors. And they come to me only when they have to get my letters signed, which is what I do. So that way my job is very safe and very clear. At the same time, a lot of responsibility goes on to them, which means that they actually grow up. So a leader is one who also ensures that the leadership is developed in juniors. That is what has happened to me. And that is something which I have learned in my organization. It just, like he said, it just happened to be there. I never thought that I will be in this position.
Great. But I mean, you have spent entire life to run this position and autopilot mode. That is not the liberty that every leader has, right? So I will come to you, Mr. Biswas. You tell me, you are heading a new bank, in fact. Can you run the bank in an autopilot mode, trust everybody, and let them come to you the way let them work the way they want to?
As a result, I think the design of the organization needed to be very consciously calibrated. The company is a company of a telco parentage under a new regulatory regime, and yet a bank. Right? And that's where I think when we set out, Airtel as a group, which is one of the top 5 valued brands in the country, set out to build this bank, it sort of took a call together to say we will build a bank with a clear organization design of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. 1/3 bankers, 1/3 Airtel, and 1/3 FinTech and startups.
Okay.
So you see there is a distinction and 2 levels. One is you're defining strategy, right? You're choosing how to play, when to play, and how much to play.
Right.
But after the strategy comes articulation, and the articulation in my mind is really the leadership call, and saying these are the percentages, these are the numbers, and this is how you will then communicate. And in my personal journey, I have found that very sort of enriching and motivating for the people, because at the end of it, an organization is made up of a set of people who are wanting to deliver something impactful to a consumer market.
Right.
Unless they are really believing in that, unless it is articulated and communicated powerfully and simply, I don't think there is a business case for building out something relevant and impactful.
Okay.
So that's been our journey within the bank in terms of having a strategy linked to a clearly articulated organization structure and design. A lot of what Ajay said, a lot of what was pointed out resonated deeply with me. We don't have frontline service.
Right.
Because actually, and if we have the time, I'd be delighted to narrate one story. There's really no clear data which is there in the country today in one point which articulates simple problems.
Right.
Let me tell you one problem.
Please.
Today, in the country, there are 350 million people consuming digital content, right? So if you just scan Google, YouTube, TikTok, and you put all of them together and you try to come to a consensus, and we can obviously look at a lot of data which is primary in nature, that number stacks up to 350 million. The number of people using digital financial services on the mobile across the entire fintech and banks and payment industry is 150 million.
Okay.
Why are 200 million people not using digital financial services on the mobile? It's a really simple problem, right? Because the size seems large and the articulation seems simple. But then how do you build an organization to deliver a solution which will convert this macro into a micro, which is to get at least 10% of the 200 million using digital financial services? And that has to be the organization structure and design. How do you lay out a service architecture? How do you lay out a product portfolio? That is really interesting and engaging and meaningful for the people within the organization.
Right.
And that's really the journey. And I think that probably answers in a little bit of detail the question which you asked me.
Great. Mr. Tripathi, I will come to you. Again, we are talking about specifically the financial institutions because most of the people here are from the BFSI sector. But in general also we'll discuss the industry. But specifically, I will ask you and give me your opening remarks on the leadership qualities that a leader should have, specifically according to you.
So, to be honest, the leadership quality which is required to be successful in a financial services world is no different than the leadership quality that you will require in succeeding the corporate world. Generally, the leadership responsibility is threefold. A, look at your current problems and solve them. B, lay out the foundation for a journey for next 3 years, which many times we call as strategy. And C, look at the culture of the organization and put the framework, vision in place and drive the change all the time so that people are engaged, motivated, and are delivering to the plans that you've laid out, these three. The unfortunate part and reality is that as leaders, our time allocation to these three agenda actually goes many times haywire. We end up spending far higher time dealing with current problems, and in the world right now, the current problems are many. B, then the time, whatever is left, we actually deal with strategy and lay out the foundation for next few years. And unfortunately, the time which is given on perhaps the most important subject of managing change, cultural agenda, motivating, engaging, the workforce, which has to kind of remain, motivated, unfortunately gets least important. And I always say we need to invert the pyramid, because if we worked the hardest on the third element and the second hardest on the second element, we won't have to spend much time on the first element, because then there'll be people who will take care of the first one without you knowing. So, the journey is always evolving. For me, I consciously try to balance out this time to make sure that I am constantly focused on driving change, laying out the agenda for the change, motivating people so that the first one, gets. In the NBFC space, there are two elements that I'll mention. The world is very dynamic. The degrees of freedoms are large. And in that context, having a constant outside in view, knowing what is happening around and how things will evolve is a matter of competitive advantage. Additionally, as a leader, having commercial skills, and when I say commercial skills, it's not about negotiation. It's about connecting the dots, which means how your customers link to your product, link to your profitability, link to your delivery, link to your distribution. That entire puzzle has to be really clear in the minds of the leaders to make sure that you are delivering optimal outcomes.
Okay, quite interesting. Mr. Chandok, your opening remarks, what is your rule book specifically, or rule book about leadership?
Thank you very much, Amol. If you had asked me this question a year ago, probably my answer would have been a little different from what I'm saying today. I've been in the banking industry for a number of years. I've moved to head ICICI Securities about 4-5 months back. One of the things that one keeps hearing in financial world is the fact that you are seeing a lot of disruption coming from newer and newer types of players, right? Actually, in this current role, I see that happening. In banks, you hear it, you kind of see it, but you can't really see it impacting you in a degree and manner that probably has been amplified and spoken about. But in our world, in the securities business, you can actually see this disruption squarely standing and staring at your face. And therefore, I think, as a leader, what I find is critical is the ability to sort of deal with this ambiguity, emerging tomorrow, disruption, which is all around. It's also important to then put together a kind of a structure around this ambiguity, a framework around this ambiguity, and then translate this ambiguity into something which is relatable to people in an organization who are probably not as comfortable dealing with ambiguity as maybe some others. And then have a one agenda, a very clear one agenda of how do we deal with this particular issue. I think a few of them alluded to the fact that the importance of communication, very, very intense communication. I think that is one way in which you get the entire people to see the point of view. I also think it's very important to be very open because clearly Mr. Kannan mentioned that people are the power of the organization and they are the ones who are actually doing the work. They have a line of sight of where the rubber is really hitting the road on an ongoing basis, and that can be a source of very important insight and feedback. So the openness to sort of hear and understand what is coming from the ground, from the customer, and then embracing that into your thinking, into your planning, into your strategy is also very important. One always heard about and spoke about the importance of collaboration.
Right.
In today's world, I see that more important than ever. I think the way disruption is hitting the financial services business, it is going to be virtually impossible if organizations are not going to collaborate with people, and not necessarily people who are in your business. It could be people who are in different businesses from what your core business is, and there are value additions that can come from the kind of things that they bring on the table. So many of these components I probably wouldn't have been able to relate to 6 months back or even 9 months back. So my concept of leadership and what's required in some sense has evolved. And I suppose this is one thing that is it's important as a leader, is to keep your mind open so that you keep upgrading things, because things are moving at a fairly rapid pace. Finally, all this abstraction, all this concreteness is one part, but unless and until you're able to put it all together and execute relentlessly, I think it has no meaning. So I think apart from all the stuff that we spoke about, to my mind, execution meticulously into the ground so that you finally get what you're actually intending to achieve is very, very important part of a leadership agenda as well.
I think it's an interesting or a very different perspective. The good one, in fact, very impressive one. Kannan sir, I will come to you specifically now, because with your wide experience, I mean, again, you are there in this industry since really long. जब टाइटैनिक डूब गया था तब वो आइसबर्ग नहीं देख पाया था. That was the major reason, because iceberg you cannot see it otherwise. Now you do not know, you know that there is an iceberg. With your wide experience, did you learn to see the iceberg so that you can save the Titanic? Did you learn to see the XYZ problem before it occurs?
And to a large extent, I would say the bankers have been sometimes proactive, sometimes reactive. Proactive in the sense, certain technological innovations which has been there in the market, much against their own will. Once they find that the FinTech companies are doing it, or probably someone has seen it somewhere, or someone just visualizes it in a particular way, things have actually happened. And technology is something, say 10 years ago, people wouldn't have even thought that, mobile banking or internet banking on the mobile would have, I think even 4 or 5 years, many of us, about, say, the beginning of the century, hardly anyone even had mobile phones. You hardly probably counted the number of people who had the mobile phones. Today, almost every person has the mobile phone, and the technology upgradation which has happened, I think the bankers have actually leapfrogged. The other day is a question asked about blockchain.
Yes.
And one thing about India especially, the way is, India doesn't accept anything immediately. It actually waits and sees if everything is stabilized, and straight away goes into Gen 4 or Gen 5, and straight away leapfrogs into the issues. So actually the other countries are the guinea pigs for us. So for example, the technology, the products which we have, the core banking, etc., we actually jumped straight away into the next generation faster. And this particular change is something which the bankers actually are in a position to quickly adapt. The way they have actually gone about the digitization in the country, immediately after the aftermath of the demonetization, I think the sea change which has happened is seen to be believed. In fact, today I was actually got a call from one of the bankers saying, Kannan, do something about excess cash lying in the banks. Okay. Physical cash lying in the banks, because it's not being taken by the customers. Because half the guys are only sending messages from here to the A to B, B to C, C to D. So no one is coming and drawing the money from the bank. They're written to RBI. RBI said, no, you manage it yourself. and they're already bursting the limits. So this basically says that the technology which has happened in many of the banks, and I'm sure many of the, of course, payments banks must have evolved on this particular basis that substantial transaction will be done on digital. Many of the commercial banks have been finding 70 to 80% of the transactions are done without anyone's knowledge.
Right.
Has its own issues on cyber issues and all, which we, of course, we are tackling it. And as someone said, cyber threats are something which you cannot prevent completely. You can only ensure that you can detect and start, addressing the issues quickly. Right. The earlier you do it. I think the bankers are, today in this environment, have, like someone mentioned also, a collaboration with the FinTech companies in both in the asset side, liability side, payment side. I had just been last week into a program in London. The entire space was only on payment systems and open banking. Right. Open banking is going to be a scenario where the bankers will not be doing anything except keeping the data. Everything else, all processing will be done by some other person. And you will probably be in a position to provide the services to the customer, but everything will be outsourced. Right. And that is something which people are adapting. And it brings the best by way of quality, best by way of pricing also, and service. I think the bankers today, much as they may have been maligned by the media, I think they are the best in India. And I don't think any other part of the world, this kind of innovation which has happened. This Anguta, 25 years ago, we were using the Anguta for an identification of person. Today, this has become the hallmark. The world over, when I go and explain to them the AEPS system, they were aghast. Right. Believe me, in the payment system space, we are miles ahead of the world here. Yes. We are way ahead of this, the second factor authentication, etc. I think bankers have really adapted to technology and the change which has happened. It's not only a question of the mindset. There is a lot of complaints. The bankers are very slow to take it up. Yes, it's quite possible because you can't expect a 50-year-old man like me, and then, of course, 10 years ago. Today I'm 65, so to adapt it quickly. But a person who is joined now today, they hardly know anything on manual. True. So I think the bankers have taken a mix of experience and this, done a wonderful job, I would say.
Right, interesting. I think the bank which has an excess cash can help PMC bank customers. They're actually looking for a lot of cash. Okay, Mr. Kanwal, I mean, specific question to you now. In fact, Mr. Kannan, gave me a hint to start the discussion specifically about the topic after having your opening remarks on the Industry 4.0 and the destruction and collaboration. Mr. Chandok also touched upon that. So, Mr. Kanwal, tell me now, as a leader, as a CEO, as a captain of the bank, how difficult it is for you to take decision because you do not know whether this decision will be sustainable for next 2 to 3 years, because of you do not know whether this collaboration will work, because you do not know this disruption that you're creating will work?
A very tough question in today's times. But let's talk of a bit around iceberg, So I think first thing any banker should do is follow prudent policies. And that will make sure that it's like insurance, You don't know when you'll need it, but you just have a healthy practice. It'll keep you safe at all times. So that I think is the first clear role of the banker. When it comes to collaborations, I think some of it is very visible. So unlike where people feel that it will change very fast, I think some partnerships, you have a clear view that inherently they create competitive walls for other people to enter. So if you're choosing the right partners, right, I think then making an investment in a 3 to 5 year horizon is not difficult. Okay. So that's rule number one. You have to be sure that you're not trying to do something which is a short-term answer saying, I need to grow sales, let me tie up with someone. Right. Then I think that's a bad answer. Okay. But if you're saying that, listen, I want to partner with somebody in a 3 to 5 year horizon, where I think he's got strengths and I've got strengths, and combined, we can face most competitors, I think you're fine. I do think there is a bit of a undersell by banks of not being fintech. I think banks have really, like Mr. Kannan mentioned, have made tremendous progress technologically. I think they continue to make investments. And I think my bias is, see, the banks are watching fintech. The best ideas they will buy and imbibe. and they will become those fintechs themselves.
Right.
So I don't think the banks are rushing into the next 5 ideas, but they're watching all the 5 ideas. They're testing all the 5 ideas. And the one they think they can scale up and they agree with, they'll bring it in and they'll really grow with it. So I would really look at a 5-year horizon where banks will really become more and more fintech than they are today. And they will really pick up the best ideas from what's available in the market. And I can tell you everybody's doing that today.
Right.
So that you can be rest assured. And there are enough fintechs who are working with banks with a clear idea saying, if they like my idea, they'll buy it and then I'll move on.
Right.
I'll come with the next idea.
In fact, very similar thought was given by Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, who in fact also clearly said that there was a time when the companies used to be 30, 40 years old, but going ahead the companies will be only for 5 to 10 years old, and you cannot expect one company to grow billions of dollars. $1 billion is a decent market size or market cap. Mr. Biswas, I will come to you again, specifically on the disruption side and the innovation side. How tough it is for you to take a decision as a leader. While adopting any innovation, thinking about the future, what makes you take a decision?
So look, it's important to have a simple framework. In our mind, there are only 2 C's. First is any decision-making framework is fundamentally around the capital structure of the industry. So all the other dimensions, whether we should compete, whether we should collaborate, all comes from the inherent capital structure. Is the capital in the industry patient? Is there adequate capital for the size of the problem? Is there going to be capital coming in from outside into the industry? Let me give a number sort of wildly. Given the nature of this topic, financial inclusion, it's useful to do a back of the envelope calculation on what is the number of or the amount of capital required to solve the financial inclusion problem once and for all in the country. Whatever model you use, in our estimate, the number required is $10 to $15 billion over a 3 to 5 year time frame. One has to be very clear if one wants to solve this problem, is one going to get that amount of capital in? If not, then collaboration has to be the most fruitful, capital efficient way to grow. This framework as to the amount of capital required really gives you a solid decision-making foundation. After that, really the other C is really conscious recalibration. One has to periodically state at what stage of the industry are we entering, at what stage will the industry potentially disrupt, and what are the spaces within the industry which could disrupt more than others. Right. Let me give you a simple maths again to underline the size of this problem or construct. If you analyze the revenue of the banking industry and you just split it into categories, 40% of the income of banks comes from deposits. Deposit taking is a regulated activity and it is not going to get disrupted because the number of licenses issued are limited. So the disruption is really going to happen in the other 60, which by the way is really lending, payments and cross-sell. And if you put this construct in front of ourselves as an audience, there is no wonder that payments is the first industry to get disrupted because it has the least amount of regulatory hurdle to cross. Now let us put a 2 to 3 year time frame as to what could happen on the technology side, given again the nature of this conversation. It is highly likely that payments will be disrupted further, and we can create some use cases around that. People talk about the WhatsApp disruption, which is imminent, but let us imagine that one has a mass transit protocol fully operative in the country. Is a WhatsApp payment architecture really going to be conducive to a mass transit, easy payment in and out? It's not. Wearables and devices are going to be far more conducive. So the disruption in payments might happen when 5G comes, and you have far better triangulated energy efficient devices which enable payments on your wearables. Once this framework of conscious calibration is there in mind, our personal assessment and within the Airtel thought process, we believe the framework to take decisions is adequately calibrated with right time frames. Therefore, it becomes a bit more Amol, a little bit more simple.
Very, very interesting answer, Mr. Biswas. Mr. Tripathi, the same question to you, but let me add a different background to it. The background to it is because you're kind of a company which is driven by a very traditional group or a promoter-driven company, you can say. तो कितना difficult होता है ऐसे में decision लेना, because sometimes you have your chairman, Mr. Narjit Singh, will come and say कि boss ऐसा मत करो, yeah, don't take this decision or don't do this. Is there, how tough it is in that particular situation or in this scenario?
Yeah, this one was a relevant question about 10 years ago. Fortunately for us, we are large enough to be a standalone, reasonably valued, and the overall revenue as well as expense base of the company is quite large for us to make those decisions. However, there are a few things that one always keeps in mind. I think the level of unpredictability with respect to the outcomes is pretty high, and you try 15, 20 ideas, 1 or 2 will work. Not all of them will work. Hence, there has to be a frame of commercial viability. There has to be a frame of trying many things, but remain focused and start to make sizable investment only when there's a confidence or there is certainty with respect to outcome. So, as a philosophy, we believe in trying many things, failing fast, but start to make investment and accelerate the investment when the chances of success is high. That's true when you are really treading into the zone of uncertainty. Many times there is a zone of certainty also, where the investment is made on the basis of conviction, and that conviction is a cumulative conviction of the management team. So, for example, you believe that you're going to make investment in something which is going to transform the way we look at customers, we will not hesitate from making that investment, and we will do it. However, if it is an investment with respect to trying a particular technology which will ease out a transactional process, then we will try multiple things and then bet on something where the chances of success is high. To your question, we are blessed that none of that conversation with respect to a promoter coming and saying, you can do this, you can't do this, now happens in the organization. We are pretty standalone. However, being a quasi-listed company, all the rules of proper governance and methodical investments are applied.
Right. So that Mukesh Ambani's statement, what brought us here will not take us there, has been replicated in all other groups, I can understand. So Mr. Chandok, again, the question is about the innovation. Initially, we thought that perhaps innovation will be more only in banking and insurance, but obviously securities market and brokers are also doing a lot of innovations. There are so many companies and fintechs operating in wealth management space, coming with specifically mobile applications and disrupting the market. Keeping this innovation in mind, how challenging it is for you to foresee the future and take decisions accordingly, because it's evolving consistently.
Very tough, because I think it's virtually impossible to imagine the forces that can hit you. Today, the kind of competition we face is actually from a completely new breed of players which didn't exist in any relevance. They were there for a number of years, but I think the relevance of the players started emerging only in the last few years. And they are also not from the traditional, banking-led sort of fraternity. So clearly, in our frame of business, we are seeing that disruption is coming from a new breed of players. We often, again in banking, hear that in future you will start seeing competition from non-competing industries. In banking, it still hasn't happened yet in any meaningful measure, but I think in this side, it's actually there for us to see. So to believe that you have line of sight of everything that is going to come along your ways is an impossibility to my mind. But it's very important to know that there are going to be sort of streaks of meteors coming all over. And therefore, the organization needs to be equipped to be able to track these various meteors that are coming along the way. Idea is to catch them ideally before it becomes meaningfully relevant. Learn out of that, scrutinize what's happening, sometimes embrace it, sometimes, partner with it, sometimes just, see what you can learn and embrace internally. But I think what's important is that you have to be very vigilant with what's happening in not only your sector, but related sectors. To be able to capture, the various kinds of innovation and the changes that are taking place.
Okay. So I think now I will take only one question, and I would like to ask that question to everyone, because we are in a industry 4.0, 2.0. UPI is also changing, and so many changes are happening that you do not know whether the app that you're using will be outdated tomorrow or not. So, Mr. Kannan, tell me one or two things that every startup, every fintech, every innovator should follow going ahead to become a top leader or deal with the disruption. I will ask the same questions to everyone, if you could.
See, now one thing we have found in the fintech, and which the regulator also finds, is their product is supposed to be, from the customer's point of view, very friendly, very fast, very quick. But there are some gaps which are there in the areas of security and features. And very often when we take it, we find that it's not possible for us to adapt it. They always say, this has been done, this has been done. So something they have to ensure is, before they actually come on board and make a presentation to the banks, they have to ensure that the security gaps are all filled up. Very often, then that is something which is missed. Secondly is, there has to be something which is a really new addition, rather than many of the fintech companies are actually repeating the same thing with a slight modification. They are actually a leapfrog product. It's not something which is completely innovative. But yes, there are a few cases of innovations which is happening. But by and large, you'll find that there's a small tweaking of a particular product and then is being offered, and that is being taken. But today, I'm actually want to find out whether banks are fintech companies also doing banking, or banking which has adapted fintech as an important element. I think maybe going forward, I saw in London a bank called Starling Bank. It doesn't have a single branch. And it's got a huge presence all over the place, just by way of word of mouth and mechanism of what you call mobile banking. The entire bank is run only on mobile phones. And it has been around for the last 2 years. It's a full-fledged universal bank, except that they don't have physical presence. So that's maybe the way forward for some of the banks like Payments Bank and all, because it doesn't make sense to have 10,000 and 20,000 outlets, but you have the presence everywhere and you can take it forward.
Right. Mr. Kanwal, I think, have a different view because they already have 15,000, employees, and they're already planning to expand. But your quick view on specifically the suggestions which you want to give to startups, fintechs, innovators to become a next leader.
One is try and, I agree with him, no point being a me too, or slightly better and slightly different. It doesn't really help. Second is think about end-to-end process and not just one part of the process, because it really becomes very difficult if you're not really doing end-to-end. So my advice is, if you can really kind of implant yourself with some journey, either a bank's journey or a customer journey or a product journey, and then live end-to-end, I think that may be a better answer than doing a bit more light work.
Mr. Biswas.
Well, two simple things, and we use that as hurdles for ourselves as well. First thing is 1-10-100. Your idea, does it make sense at 1 million, 10 million and 100 million? A lot of our ideas just get shot down because the costs of getting to 10 million just kills the business model right there and then. I think that's the first simple thing. Second is start with the end in mind. If you're offering a free service, project a future when you have to start charging consumers. And is there a final viable revenue model at the end of it?
Okay. Mr. Tripathy?
Very similar. I think any idea that you think about must solve genuine customer issues. The customer could be the end customer, the customer could be a corporate or the bank or the financial services. So think about the problem that you are trying to solve, and that has to be a genuine problem that either solves cost issues, productivity issues, turnaround time issues, or things like that, which are quite relevant. And be, very similar to, the issue of scalability. Can you scale it up? Is that a problem of many people? And will you be able to then replicate that across multiple customers very quickly or not?
Mr. Chandok.
Well, I think all great points. I'm not going to repeat the stuff. I completely agree with all the points made. I think they are very important. Two additional points I'll make is, as a fintech, you're often on a dilemma. I've done my business model. I've sort of found it right. Now, do I go ahead and launch it? Oh no, it's not okay. My Taj Mahal is still getting made. And you're trying to just wait for the Taj Mahal getting sort of made and keep delaying stuff. I think at that point in time, my sort of advice would be, if I can say so, is just go ahead and launch it and then come out with newer and newer versions very rapidly, because the scale of upgrades, changes, etc. in today's world is a matter of 6 weeks. One of my favorite examples is that of a WhatsApp. All of us use WhatsApp, and to my mind, it's one of the best UI UX that you can see, best interface that you can probably experience. Every 45 days, there's a new version that sort of lands up in your store, and then it says, please upgrade. I don't know what he upgrades, but he must be upgrading something. Similarly, I think the learning for me was that once 45 days, we don't hesitate to come out with a newer version of whatever you're doing. So build that capability as you're, adhering to all of this stuff. And finally, I would say, please try and latch on to a nice financial partner like SoftBank. It'll help.
Great. We have just scope for only one question because we have to start the award ceremony at the earliest. So one question quickly. Anybody, please.
With a reference to the last point that you just made about coming up with newer and newer versions, what do you think is the cost of rework? Don't you consider this as a technical debt?
No, not at all. I think it's got to be very low. Your process should be a low-cost, flexible process. So in your beginning itself, create the ability to keep making changes and upgrades at as minimal cost as possible. You have to think your whole creation from that perspective, from scratch.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kanwal has to catch a flight, so we have to wind up here. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to us patiently. And thank you, Vijay Kannan sir, Ajay Kanwal sir, Anubrata Biswas sir, Prashant Tripathy sir, and Vijay Chandok sir for giving us the meaningful insights. Thank you so much for listening to us patiently.